In this video, we are going to discuss the technology, the future technology, ectogenesis, as it relates to the general problem of abortion. And I should lay my cards on the table. I think that this topic is really quite interesting. Ectogenesis is, generally speaking, the idea that we could at some point remove a fetus from a human womb without killing the fetus and without violating a woman's right to autonomy, her right to do what she wants to with her body. As such, it seems like this sort of sci-fi technology might have some really important implications for the general problem of abortion. So let's think about that. Let's take a look at how that would work. Now, I don't think it would be too far of a stretch to say that most people, when they hear the word ectogenesis, they probably think of it as some sort of science fiction that's sort of quarantined to the realm of different novels or movies or what have you. But I want to try and take this future technology really serious. So while it's true that this technology is the sort of thing that you probably only thought about in terms of some sci-fi movie, maybe a movie like The Matrix or something else, nonetheless, if it was the case that we could remove the fetus from the human womb without killing the fetus and without violating any kind of a right to autonomy that the woman might have, well, then it seems like this technology should be something we take really seriously. And as it turns out, we're actually already doing quite a bit as far as research is concerned, moving in this direction. So I don't know how far advanced everything is at this moment. What I can say, however, is that there's already research being done on non-human animals. And so it seems plausible that in the future, this will be a technology that's available for humans as well. But what about right now? Well, right now, there's already situations where a fetus is put into what you might consider to be an artificial womb or something very similar, an incubator, for example. And this takes place when you have a preemie baby. So the technology clearly is moving in that direction. And it seems plausible that we will continue to develop technologies that will allow us to, maintain the well-being of a fetus independently of the human womb. So now there's two different types of ectogenesis that we should be aware of. The first type of ectogenesis, let's call full ectogenesis. And this is when an egg is fertilized outside of the womb. The fetus is never in the womb at any point. It's always in an artificial womb. So it's fertilized outside of independently of any human, and the embryo develops entirely independent of the human womb. That's full ectogenesis. Now, partial ectogenesis is when the ovum is fertilized normally through sexual intercourse. And so the embryo does begin in a human womb. But at some point during the gestation, maybe very, very early on within the gestation, the fetus is removed from the human womb and gestated in an artificial womb. So it's going to be this kind of ectogenesis, partial ectogenesis, that we're going to be primarily concerned with here. But why should we take this kind of future technology seriously, right? Why should we care about this at all, really? Well, you might think that there's certain feminist type reasons. Presumably, this technology would allow for the kind of liberation of the burdens of childbearing that are oftentimes associated with what a woman has to go through. Right? So there might also be health reasons. It might just be safer for a fetus and a mother to develop the fetus outside of the human womb in an artificial womb. And insofar as we are concerned with the well-being of the mother and the fetus, sort of these utilitarian type calculations, well, those health reasons might be good reasons to think that taking this technology seriously is something we should be concerned with. And, well, you might also think that there's just more opportunities for women who couldn't have children in the first place. And so through the technology of ectogenesis, this could perhaps provide a really interesting alternative for women in these sort of situations. And of course, you might think, while this may not be a morally relevant reason, still nonetheless, you might think that there's kind of cosmetic reasons. Presumably, some women would choose to undergo this procedure for the same kind of reasons that some choose to maintain a very strict diet while pregnant. So if the technology is something that's available, it looks like it's something that we should take seriously. Now, what about ectogenesis with regard to abortion? How does it fit into this sort of story, right? Why should we be concerned with ectogenesis as it relates to the general problem of abortion? Traditionally, recall that the problem of abortion has been kind of understood as either a question about whether the fetus is a person from from conception, and if it is a person, then it has a right to life, presumably. That's one way that people kind of approach the issue. But also we kind of think about the problem of abortion in terms of a woman's right to autonomy, whether it would ever outweigh a fetus's right to life. And if it does, then what sort of circumstances would say that abortion would be permissible, such that the woman's right to autonomy overrules or outweighs the fetus's right to life? That's kind of been the general way in which we've talked about the problem of abortion so far. But given the possibility of ectogenesis, right, given that we could presumably safely remove a fetus from a woman's womb and gestate it in an artificial womb, right, such that the fetus would actually live, well, then it seems like the very notion of abortion now becomes somewhat ambiguous, right? So on the one hand, we might say that abortion might mean that it's the lethal termination of one's pregnancy. But we also might think that abortion means the non-lethal termination of one's pregnancy, right? So given the possibility of ectogenesis, we could literally end a pregnancy without killing the fetus. That seems like it's going to directly influence what we think the concept of abortion really means. So typically we think that abortion necessarily involves the death of the fetus. That's because today, typically when a woman chooses to have an abortion, it just does result in the death of the fetus. But we might wonder whether or not that would have to be the case given the possibility of ectogenesis. Seems like it wouldn't. So given that possibility, we have a new question. Does a woman's right to have an abortion automatically, or does it necessarily entail that she has a right to the death of the fetus? Right? Or does it just simply mean that she has a right to end her pregnancy? So now we're going to think about this problem, given the possibility of ectogenesis, as a question of whether or not abortion means the right to the death of the fetus, or if it just means that the woman has a right to end her pregnancy, but not necessarily that she has a right to the death of the fetus. So the authors that we're going to be concerned with, the first two are Eric Matheson and Jeremy Davis in their paper titled, "Is There a Right to the Death of the Fetus?" So what they claim is they argue that a woman's right to obtain an abortion does not entail that she has a right to the death of the fetus, only that she has a right to end her pregnancy, right? So according to Matheson and Davis, Matheson and Davis argue that it just isn't the case that abortion conceptually entails a right to the death of the fetus. And that's because, given the possibility of ectogenesis, you can end the pregnancy without killing the fetus. So according to Matheson and Davis, they claim, and you might think that seems plausible, they claim that you would actually need to provide a positive argument to show that a woman does still have a right to the death of the fetus, even when ectogenesis is possible. So even when you could end one's pregnancy without killing the fetus, you would need some further reason to think that you do have a right to the death of the fetus. And that seems like something that's a little more difficult to do. Jonan Rosinen has a paper that you are reading, and it's called "Ectogenesis, Abortion, and a Right to the Death of the Fetus." Now, Rosinen does something interesting. Rosinen disagrees with Matheson and Davis, right? But Rosinen argues that there is a right to the death of the fetus, but that right is not one that the woman alone possesses. Rather, the right to the death of the fetus is a collective right. That collective right is possessed by both the biological parents. So it's not a right that the woman alone has. So in a sense, Rosalind actually agrees with Matheson and Davis that there is no individual right to the death of the fetus that the woman alone has. But Rosalind disagrees with Matheson and Davis insofar as Rosalind does think that there is a collective right to the death of the fetus. So how that plays out between these two papers is going to be fairly interesting. And so that's what we're going to do in the next few lectures.